Hello and welcome back to the Big Bold Health podcast. I'm your co-host James Maskell. I'm here with Dr. Jeffrey Bland, and we are interviewing people on the forefront of health creation, and really excited to be here today. And typically I do all the intros, Doc, but I think today you're going to do it.
Well, it's very kind of you to give me some chance to do an intro. But I'm very privileged to do this intro because I know our guest quite well, Dr. Sheelin Coates Hall. What a remarkable woman she is, but I'll tell you a little bit about her because she wouldn't say it about herself because she's too self-effacing to do so. So Sheelin is many things, but I'm just going to kind of give a biographical sketch. She is a veterinarian, obviously grew up in Australia, as you'll hear from her wonderful Australian accent. She was on a station with her family, a large multi-thousand acre cattle ranch in which she grew up with intimate relationships with the environment and with horses and with cows, and really leading that rugged life that you might think of kind of the classic being out back and being in nature. Then she traveled from her vet school and went ultimately and did postdoctoral work in Florida, which is considered one of the large animal vet specialty areas, and got into the dairy cattle, which she wasn't really that excited about because of the way dairy cattle were being raised and maintained, and within the BST age and all those kind of hormones things. And then from there, through a trip through London and England and back into the veterinary drug area, where she was thinking maybe that's a solution to the problem, is to get into veterinary pharmaceuticals, and found, well, maybe that wasn't really so good. Eventually got an MBA, then went into banking, thinking maybe that was going to help for beneficial support of good activities of humans. And she found that the investment banking area was not so good either. And she has taken all this extraordinary talent, including taking her children to Italy to do cooking school in Italy, and educating them.
A master's in food and sustainability, no cooking involved.
Oh, master's in, okay, well that's even more profound. Thank you, because that was going to be my segue. What the
I wish there was more cooking.
the Sheelin that I know today is a woman who is a steward of the universe. She is, with this deep training and background, both on the natural life side and on the biosciences and health sciences side, has constructed this extraordinary persona of depth and character that relates to stewardship of the land, stewardship of the species that live on the land, and stewardship of the community of people that are using the land and its space that we call ecos, or home. So Sheelin, with all of that, you sit as a guest for Big Bold Health with a principle that I think is so important for us to be spending more time in, and that is this concept of healthy planet, healthy people, healthy planet. And I know that this has been a driving force for you as you've gone through all these different iterations of your self-education and your professional activities. So let me just say first, how did you start down this path, and how did you get here? Because just saying it, probably people are saying, wow, she must have lived like 3 lifetimes.
I know, and I guess it's just, I consider it the journey of life, and you never quite know where the next wave is going to take you. You just got to be open to catching that next wave. And I guess I feel very blessed and grateful to have grown up in a wonderful country environment where, it was just my family on this big property, and where we didn't have much else to do apart from, interact with nature. But then having grown up there, and then going to Brisbane to school and then university, and then across to Florida and moving into the intensive dairy industry, that was an absolute contrast. But it really, I arrived in the States with very rose-coloured glasses on. And also, I guess I've always been, I come from a town called Eidsvold, which in itself has got a lot of history to it. But I said, I'm Sheelin from Eidsvold. And literally, I was this little country bumpkin. And my journey has opened my eyes, unfortunately not in the best of ways. Then Jeff didn't mention, I met my late husband, Alex Hall, who is a very well-known entity, or was a very well-known person in the natural health industry in Australia as well as in the States and Canada. And I feel very blessed that Alex actually introduced me to the natural health industry, because I guess it's been like all the knots, all the strings came together, and it started to tie up all my experiences and observations. Sadly, Alex had a brain tumour. He'd had it when he was 19. We met when he was only 26. It came back 18 months later, and then for the next 6 years we were caught up in dealing with the medical system and all that entails. So that in itself was a big eye-opener. So as I said, it's and then we now have 3 children. Alex passed away when I was pregnant with our twins, and it's, I guess you don't expect these things to happen in life, but they do, and you can't prepare yourself for them. But I guess in everything, there are learnings and gifts to be had, and while it hasn't been the easiest journey, I guess I wouldn't change the learnings, and they've brought me to where I am now. I guess with Alex's journey and being in the medical system, I became very interested in, what's going on in our food system, in the pharmaceutical system. I mean, where have we gone so incredibly wrong? And I guess that led me then down to the track. It's like, where do you have to go to the very beginning? Where does it all start? And I believe it all starts with our soil, and fundamentally our health depends on our soil health and our planetary health, and obviously the food that we put in our mouths, every mouthful, counts towards either contributing to better health and a better planet, or else detracting from our health and contributing to climate change, etc. So that's a very convoluted answer to.
I don't think that's convoluted. I think it's the depth that makes people what they are, right? It is your story that makes you such a person of importance, because I think you can speak across all sorts of areas with personal experience, not by conjecture, not by speculation. You've lived, you've walked the journey. And I think that as a seeker, which you are, and a lifelong learner, you've obviously affected the kind of thoughts of many people. And this is really the essence of Big Bold Health. Because if we're going to be changing the concept of health globally, we need not to be apologetic. We need to be big and bold about our assertions. We need to obviously be well prepared. We need to be courteous, and we need to be understanding. But we shouldn't be feeling like we have to be apologetic about the story. And so when I look at what you've done and how you're raising your children, and the whole concept of ecological integrity and systems thinking, I'm wondering how that translates. You live in Noosa in New South Wales, in Queensland. How does that translate out from what you see to the people that are living in that area? Are there certain things you see blocks? Are there certain places where the eyes glaze over? Where are the receptive places where your story starts to gain resonance?
Well, I guess I'm very lucky to be living in a UNESCO biosphere, and I don't know if people are familiar with that, but it's so Noosa is it's been designated a biosphere, and it's where man meets environment, and that's one of the reasons why we've moved to Noosa, because it means that the environment is placed as a priority, and also just recognising that environmental health is critical to human health is also at the forefront too. Of course, Noosa, being a premier beach destination, has its fair share of developers, and so you've got the opposing interests. But I've only lived in Noosa for 3 years, but I basically started a concept. Well, it's a global movement called Green Drinks Noosa, and I'm very social. That's one of the things I like, to bring people together. So and Green Drinks occurs in about 600 cities around the world, and it's so that people with environmental and community interests can actually meet each other, network, and establish and strengthen connections. So I've started that in Noosa, and that has meant that I've automatically met all the people that are interested in environment and community and health. And I was going to say too, another thing, I'm a very passionate environmental activist now, because that's also, I realise that's part of it's fundamental to health too. So we can't afford to sit back and be complacent. If we want change, we've got to go out and be the change. And but again, as I said, I've been lucky to come into an environment where once you provide an opportunity or a forum for people who are interested in these things to come out and meet each other, because often we're all lonely voices, and that's been a great experience because I've met some wonderful people, and also just seeing the different connections being made across different groups has been really fulfilling as well. And I think in my journey, I suppose I've noticed, even being in Australia, people tend to operate in silos, and that's one, and I guess that's also the divide and conquer policy. If the bigger forces at play don't want change to occur, then they basically pit people against each other or separate them, and that's been a big issue in the natural health industry in Australia. The government has done a lot of things to really weaken it and to undermine it over the years, and you find that even with the environmental movements too. It's the divide and conquer, put up lots of roadblocks. So I guess my passion is to bring people together, and once we're all together and linking arms across different industry, natural health, in the environmental movement, I think, because we all have one big goal, which is a better planet, which is ultimately going to lead to better health and a better life.
I think that the sort of overarching concept of where we've been is this age of separation, right? Separation from nature and separation from each other. And I really resonate with bringing those people together, because ultimately that's what the Functional Forum was all about. It was about bringing together people who cared about functional medicine together, because they were disparate and they were isolated and they were, operating in their own little environment, and just knowing and seeing just the magic that has occurred, some of which I've witnessed, most of which I have not witnessed because it's been happening on 6 continents.
Exactly.
Is just really, really incredible. What have been some of the things that you've that have
Could I jump in there really quickly? I think you said something very important. I want to go to Sheelin in just a sec with your question, but I think you've really hit on the essence of why we decided to move forward with Big Bold Health. What we have tried to do is be a safe meeting place, right, for individuals who aspire to have planetary and personal health being conjoined, to see this as a system, and to have their advocacy and their aspirations being met and supported and reinforced by communication with others. And so that's why we asked the question, what is health to you? Because what we want is people to express their own personal aspirations for health and see how this universe of aspirations connects together to form a different system. It's not a system of the absence of disease means you're healthy. It means the presence of function to create posterity, to create longevity, to create, I guess you'd call it sustainability, becomes a major kind of collective of individuals, so that we've moved from a fear-based model, which is disease, to a proactive upward mobile model, which is the proactivity of health as being a central feature. And I think what Sheelin is bringing through this conversation, and your question relates to, is how do we form communities that allow that alliance to really do the impossible, to create the changes globally that will really reconstruct survivability.
Yeah, 100%. And, I'd love to just, find out from your experience of bringing these people together, what are some of the outshoots that come from that? Because ultimately, that's where the magic is really happening, right?
Well, for instance, just in the last couple of meetings, we've had a couple of lawyers who have been wanting to do their bit for the environment, and but again, as they've attended, and so now they've connected with other people who need that help, and but again, most environmental groups can't afford it, and I think. Also, I was actually just going back because when I was in Italy, the degree I did was a degree at the University of Science and Gastronomy, which is a university that was established by the slow food movement. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the slow food movement. It's very active in the States, but it originated in Italy, and it was set up in response to fast food in the 80s. But slow food is all about conviviality. I mean, they're trying to bring back the importance of meeting around a table, of bringing people together, of conversation, and also because I think, there's food and there's health, but there's a whole other aspect about food, and that's about, it brings cultures together, it brings societies together, it keeps family together, or we meet to celebrate over food, and we have good conversation. And when you have sit at a long lunch or something, that's when you do have great conversation, you discover a lot more about people, and you form much stronger connections. So I guess I've also come from that background, and so bringing that in across to green drinks as well, as just because I think, it's wonderful when you do see people meet and resonate and connect, and you can feel the frequency rise in the room too when you've got like-minded people, especially when they find their tribe too, because I think I've often felt that I did a little bit of like a square peg in a round hole often, and so not quite resonating with everyone else. So it's so nice when you do come across a group of people who are like-minded, who do think the same way. And again, I suppose it's more than incremental. I was saying to Jeff, it becomes 1 + 1 = 5 when you meet those other people, and you realise that you aren't a lonely voice. And I guess it also gives you a lot more confidence and power as well, because you know that there's other people that'll back you up. You're not crazy. Yeah.
It's very interesting as I'm listening to it, because you and I shared an experience actually in Noosa when I was visiting not too long ago that I really was so energized by, that demonstrates what you're talking about. So I had met this woman at a meeting actually in Texas who was Australian, and had lunch with her, and she was a very powerful molecular geneticist and was doing genomic testing and was doing personal nutrition counseling in Australia. And of course, I had met and knew you very well. And then in this conversation, she just mentioned that she's relocated from Melbourne to Noosa. And I said, oh, my word, isn't that amazing? I have this good friend who lives in Noosa, and maybe I could broker a conversation between the two of you. You both have young children. Maybe it would be an interesting thing for you to meet. So we were fortunate to get this meeting together. And what occurred for me as an outside observer, watching two women of power and authority and wisdom who met for the first time, and how quickly you were able to find the commonality of your belief systems, and that was the 1 + 1 = 5. I could see it before my very eyes. And it turns out that she only lived but just a small distance from you, which was even a more significant coincidence. But it was a living example of what happens when you form a safe place for people with ideas that they share in common to create goodness. And that's what we're trying to do with Big Bold Health, is be that kind of a location.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I want to throw out one word that I think maybe typifies a lot of what you're talking about, whether it be the relationship that you created there or whether it talk about your work. I want to talk about, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this word, regeneration.
Mm-hmm.
And what that word means to you in all the different aspects that you're applying it.
Well, I guess it's regeneration, obviously, of the soil and the planet, but also of community. Regeneration of hope as well. I think a lot of people are feeling confounded. They're not quite sure what to do. They've lost their optimism. So it's finding ways to re-inspire people. But I do think community is fundamental, and bringing together people. Because just that, it doesn't matter how healthy you are. If you're living an isolated life, it's lonely. You've got to have every spoke in the wheel. And I think community, especially in places like Australia and America, where we stem from, we're cultures where I guess we've had a lot of people that have travelled a long way. They've been separated from their original communities. They're big countries. You're separated from family. So it's hard to maintain those cultural traditions, and community tends to break down. And when you go back to Europe and places, and you see how, you go to a village and the whole community gets together, and the children are out there, and the 90-year-old grandparents are out there, and they all participate together. And they learn to coexist, and also learn to accept each other's differences, because that's I think that's also something that's fundamental to change, is learning to accept that we do have different opinions, but to honour other people's belief systems, and then find those points of connection, because whenever you do talk to people, you will find a place where you both resonate. with, or a point that you might both agree on. So, but until you actually start establishing those dialogues, you're never going to find those points of commonality, and just connecting people, because we are energetically all connected. We've just somehow built up all these different barriers between us.
You know, I've noticed a theme recently is that, and I'm a part of this theme, is that people who are in this world of health creation that we're in, whether you call it functional medicine or otherwise, are getting into farming.
Yep.
I've started to grow hot peppers and I
Tell
make
me
hot
about
sauce. And, I saw the film, The Biggest Little Farm, recently on a plane, and just saw the power of regenerative agriculture. And I just thought there are so many lessons that cross across from regenerating the earth and regenerating the health of our microbiomes, as an example. Jeff,
Well,
I'm sure this is right in your zone.
But I think, that's the thing. I've also done the same. So I've been building a house. It's a toxin-free house, and trying to live as much off the grid as I can, but in suburbia. But just, I think growing your own food is fundamental. And unfortunately, actually everyone can grow their own food. You can just get a little cup with a bit of soil in it and grow a seedling, and that's all it takes. But it just gives us a much greater understanding of how difficult it can be to grow food, and why we have to spend good money on good food. And I think, but I mean, for me, I've built this big garden, and it's taking an inordinate amount of work, but actually whenever I'm in it, I feel so happy. It's just, I now see what it is about gardening, but I think just getting your hands in the soil too just instantly reconnects you with what's fundamental to life, and what, I think everyone should be. I mean, these school gardening programs are so key, I think, to teaching children how important that is, and how soul-filling it is too, to get out there and to grow your own food, and once you've got that connection with food, you appreciate it so much more too.
I'm so glad that you're having this conversation, because I'm kind of just going right back to 7 years of age for me. I grew up in the Southern California, in the San Fernando Valley in Southern California. My parents relocated. My dad was from Illinois, that's where I was born. We relocated in the 40s to Southern California, and we had a little tract house. My dad was a veteran from World War II, so all the houses were the same. But in the back of our house, small little house, was a little planter box. So my dad was big on laying bricks. He liked to have all things neat, nice and neat. So we had brick planters, and there was one space that was maybe, as I remember it, maybe not probably in 5 feet long by 3 feet wide, that he put a brick border around it. It was just got sandy, Southern California soil. And so my mom says to me, "This is your garden." I was 7 years old. "Take it." And that was an incredible experience for me, because every year for the next 5 years, until I was about 12, I think, I would have my separate rows of vegetables. I'd have my turnips, I'd have my radishes, I would have my tomatoes. I had, let's see, what else did I have? I had cucumbers, I had peppers. So I have these rows, and that was my world, is seeing this garden through to the end of the season, and picking stuff up and being able to give it to my mother for dinner. And it was as I at the time, of course, when you're a kid, you just do it. You don't think much about it. On reflection, I think it really set in a pattern, very important pattern for me, that has followed probably through my whole life. Because what my mother was really trying to do is teach me about nutrition. She was very, very big on nutrition and the connection of nutrition to the soil. None of my friends knew about growing anything. We all lived in the same neighborhood, but I was the one that had this little tiny garden. So I think your points are very well. If we're talking about big and bold things.
Well, in the 50s, the rage was like mayonnaise in a can.
That's exactly right.
You have the opposite experience of that, and look where we've all ended up.
Actually, it made me think, though, when I was 8, I was trying to make wine. So what does that say about me?
You were much more sophisticated than me.
But actually, that brought to mind one thing that really struck me, reading Nelson Mandela's book, Long Walk to Freedom, because he, when he was in jail for 20 years, he built a vegetable garden in the jail, and he basically, I think that's, because he was getting nutrition from that, but I think also just the solace that provided him. So not only did it, I think it helped his mental health and also physical health, but
Well, it's interesting. I've been diving deep in the last year to understanding group medical visits. And, you know, sometimes these groups start as people coming together and being together in groups because they all have type 2 diabetes. But if the group is run well, after a short period of time, they don't, they're healthy. And these people want to stay together because they build community. And I asked the guy who was building these groups, what happens after insurance stops billing for these and what do they look like? And he goes, well, they just start doing healthy behaviors together as a group, and they decide as a group what they want to do. Well, I was like, well, what do they do? And he's like, the number one thing, they all like gardening.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting to see that even, gardening as a group, take anything that's healthy and do it together.
Yeah.
I think there's a real, there's a real companionship.
I'm still
in
trying to convince my children of that.
You give them 5 feet by 3 feet.
Yeah, exactly. I've got to give them ownership.
Take
That's a
away
big,
that. That's
yeah.
it. That's all you need. Well, look, I'm super excited to be having this conversation and to bring, all these disparate areas together, because ultimately, Jeff, I know that the Big Bold Health has a agricultural angle to it.
Absolutely. This is a healthy planet, healthy people. That's what when health is with a capital H. It's not a lowercase, it's a big capital H. And Sheelin, you've helped to make our the font size of our big H even bigger. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, James.
It's been wonderful to have this conversation. And, for those of you at home, please go to the website and tell us what health means to you. We've had a number of people that health to them means the ability to be able to participate in growing food and being part of their community. So also, if you have people that that are interested in agricultural practices and how it relates to health and gardening, we'd love them to see this episode as well. So please share on social media. But in the meantime, I'm your host, James Maskell, my co-host, Dr. Jeffrey Bland, and we'll see you next time.